Each episode of this channel takes a topic and two books that help me really understand it, and tries to give you the honest version of what I found inside them. These are the ideas that I think matter most right now. Consciousness, meaning, civilization, the sacred, the crises we're in, and what might come after them. No agenda other than that. If something resonates, pass it on. The right book at the right time can change the direction of a life. That's the whole point of this. I can't tell you how David Bentley Hart's The Experience of God found me. It was a year or two into my MSc in consciousness, spirituality and transpersonal psychology, and it appeared on a shelf in a recommendation. I genuinely don't remember. What I do remember is The Resistance, a book with God in the title. After everything I described in the last episode, the forced confirmation, the fairy tales, the 2 decades of deliberate distance from anything that smelled of organised religion, I would not have touched a book with that word on the cover for most of my adult life. Something made me pick it up anyway, and I'm glad that I did. Hart is a Christian theologian, but The Experience of God is not an argument for Christianity. It's something far more radical and far more useful than that. It's a demolition of the terms on which the modern debate about God has been conducted. Hart's central claim is that both sides, the religious fundamentalists and the new atheists, are arguing about a God that classical theology never actually proposed. The God of Dawkins' objections, the cosmic grandfather who intervenes in history and can be voted in or out of existence by the findings of physics, is not the God of Augustine, of Aquinas, of the great Hindu, Islamic and Buddhist metaphysical traditions. The classical conception of God is not a being among beings, not a very powerful person somewhere above the clouds. God, classically understood, is being itself, consciousness itself, bliss itself. The Sanskrit terms Hart refers to throughout the book, Sat Chit and Ananda, point towards something that is not a hypothesis about the universe, but the precondition for there being a universe at all. What this did to me reading it during the MSc was considerable. I spent 2 decades not just avoiding religion, but avoiding the entire category of the sacred that organised religion had poisoned for me. Hart gave me a language, rigorous, philosophically precise, drawing on traditions from across the world for something I'd begun to experience but just still couldn't really name. The question at the heart of this book isn't whether God exists in the way a chair or a planet exists. The question is whether consciousness is fundamental to reality or whether it's an accidental byproduct of matter. That question, I was discovering through my studies, is the central unresolved question of contemporary science. It's not a religious question at all. It is the question. Iain McGilchrist's The Master and His Emissary arrived more recently. I read it about 6 months ago, and it hit with a different kind of force. Where Hart operates in the territory of metaphysics and theology, McGilchrist is a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, and his argument begins in the structure of the brain. The 2 hemispheres of the human brain do not, as popular understanding and my previous understanding would have it, simply divide tasks between them, logic on the left, creativity on the right. McGilchrist's argument, built on decades of neurological research, is that they attend to the world in fundamentally different ways. The left hemisphere deals in abstractions, categories, mechanisms, certainty, control. It takes the world apart and manages the pieces. The right hemisphere holds the living whole, context, relationship, ambiguity, the sense that reality exceeds what can be said about it. Both are necessary. But Western civilization, McGilchrist argues, has progressively handed the governance of almost everything, science, economics, politics, education, medicine, to the left hemisphere only, while the right has been systematically marginalised. The consequences of that, once you see them, are everywhere. The reduction of human beings to economic units, the treatment of nature as a resource to be pillaged and extracted, the inability of institutions to hold complexity or tolerate mystery, the flattening of culture into content, the progressive disappearance of everything that cannot be measured, priced or optimized. McGilchrist is not making a romantic argument for feeling over thinking. He is making a neurological argument that we have created a civilization that is, in a very precise clinical sense, running on only half a brain. I find myself thinking a lot about AI as I read it, because what we're building with AI is, to use McGilchrist's terms, the most powerful left hemisphere tool in human history, extraordinary at language, pattern recognition, abstraction, categorization, the manipulation of information. And we are outsourcing to it at accelerating pace precisely the cognitive functions the left hemisphere specialises in. That raises a question that I don't really think is rhetorical anymore. Once we've outsourced our left hemisphere thinking entirely to machines, what remains distinctively human? The answer, I think, is everything the left hemisphere was never equipped to provide. Direct experience, embodied presence, the sense of meaning that cannot be computed. The encounter with something that exceeds the model, the right hemisphere, in other words. McGilchrist's concern may contain, paradoxically, its own remedy, not because AI will destroy us, it might, but because it may finally force us to recover what we've actually abandoned. Hart and McGilchrist are not in obvious conversation with each other here. One is a theologian and one is a neuroscientist, but they are diagnosing the same civilisational failure, just from different angles. Hart shows us that we misunderstood what the tradition was pointing at, reduced the infinite to the manageable, and then threw it away when the manageable version failed to convince us. McGilchrist shows us that the neurological machinery by which the reduction happens, and has been happening across centuries and centuries of Western thought. Both books point towards the same recovery, not a return to religion, not a rejection of science, but a reintegration of modes of knowing that we've been treating as opposites, but they were never meant to be. I came to Hart resistant and left changed. I came to McGilchrist curious and left with a framework that now I cannot unsee. I recommend both in that order to anyone who has ever felt that the world as currently arranged is missing something it cannot quite bring itself to name.